I firmly believe that the words and actions of those who would presume to lead us should be viewed through the prism of kindness to others, kindness to other people, and all living creatures. Tom Paine, who was arguably the greatest Englishman who ever drew breath, wrote this at about the same time as the American War of Independence. Let it be heard, and let man learn to feel that the true greatness of a nation is founded in principles of humanity. The sentiment of Paine's words is echoed at the beginning of the Swiss constitution, and Switzerland is arguably the most democratic nation in the world. In addition to keeping themselves free of war for almost 2 centuries, even when completely surrounded by it, twice, Switzerland is also one of the wealthiest nations in the world, in spite of being a landlocked country with few natural resources and no foreign empire to plunder. And it has some of the highest social and environmental policies and practices on earth. In other words, the Swiss must be doing something right. The opening words of their federal constitution resonate with the spirit of Tom Paine, for they read, "The strength of a people is measured by the well-being of its weakest members." Do I think the words and actions of our trusted leaders show any interest at all in the weakest members of society, in kindness, humanity, and the well-being of others? Absolutely not. And in future recordings, I'll prove it many times over. So, much of what I'll be doing is to show why a project like the School of Kindness is so necessary, but I'll also show how to create a society based on common humanity and kindness. If the Swiss can do it in the most difficult of circumstances, and they clearly can, why not everyone else? So what exactly is kindness? Most ordinary human beings are naturally kind people. I think this is possibly due to the fact that all animals, and human beings are after all animals experience kindness from their very first moments of life. Without the kindness of at least one adult feeding them and keeping them warm and safe from harm, most animals would simply perish within moments of being born. In other words, kindness is instinctive to all people, essential to our survival. It's in our very genes. It's that thing inside us that makes most people anywhere on the planet feel sympathy when others are suffering and joy when others are happy. These are perfectly normal human reactions, normal to nearly all humans, everywhere. We are nearly all instinctively kind and caring creatures. A kind person is not necessarily someone who spends every waking minute trying to perform good and heroic deeds. When I was in medical school, I was taught the first principle of medicine is simply to do no harm. So too with kindness. We could say the simplest expression of kindness is just to do no harm. Conversely, it isn't natural to be cruel or indifferent to the suffering of others. Indifference and cruelty have to be taught. Perhaps there are exceptions, freakish mutations. Perhaps a few people are born with an instinctive desire to hurt others for no obvious reason. I say perhaps because it's difficult to know for sure, given the fact that our society has long been controlled and led by leaders who deliberately create cruel and heartless individuals to serve the tyrannical purposes of leaders. It's almost impossible to know for sure if those we label as psychotic were in fact born that way or made that way. But the point is, whether psychopaths are born or made, they are still exceptions. They are still a tiny minority. They are not normal. So, given the rarity of psychopaths and my firm belief that most people anywhere on the planet are naturally kind, why is it that so much suffering and cruelty exists, as it most surely does? Because quite apart from the millions of people who suffer various forms of cruelty every day of the week, there are also billions of animals who endure even worse suffering at the hands of cruel people. So how then can I claim that cruel people are exceptional and that most people are naturally kind, if so much cruelty is obviously taking place? Easy. I think that most of those people who are indifferent or intentionally unkind or cruel to others are not born that way. They're made that way. They're trained to behave like that, conditioned to override their instinctive capacity for kindness. Feeling indifference to the suffering or hardship of other living creatures does not come naturally to us. It is something that must be taught. Unfortunately, it's all too easy to teach insensitivity and cruelty, as the blood-soaked pages of history can easily prove. So let's think for a moment about those people who are taught to become cruel and inhuman monsters, such as the beasts who work in factory abattoirs and slaughterhouses, for example, or professional torturers, say, or drone operators, who casually sit in air-conditioned luxury, murdering defenseless people thousands of miles away from them, or those who operate concentration camps, or obscenities such as Guantanamo Bay. Who are these people who do this vile work? Why do they do it? And who are those that teach and condition them to do so? I don't think the majority of these people were born with a natural taste for such occupations. I think they're man-made freaks. Mercifully, I've never personally known any concentration camp personnel, but I'm sure that most of those people, when they were children, say, never dreamed of becoming accessories to genocide. They had to learn to do it. They had to be taught it. Now, these people are not taken off the street one day as normal, kind and caring human beings and turned into genocidal zombies by the following day. The process is invariably a slow one, a gradual descent into hell, step by step, little by little, turning ordinary and naturally kind people into unspeakable monsters of the very worst kind. Why do I think this? Because I've been in the army and endured the dehumanizing process firsthand. I have been through the routine brainwashing of normal people that turns them into mindless automatons known as soldiers. People conditioned to be blind obeyers of orders, no matter what. And I've also been to medical school, where inflicting pain on helpless laboratory animals for pointless student experiments never warranted a second's thought. It's only a very small step from standard military training, or medical training, anywhere in the world, to become a concentration camp guard or a professional torturer. Some people might doubt that and think they could never be so easily programmed, but these people have surely never been in the army, or if they have, they haven't thought about what happens to them there. And the doubters probably haven't seen the infamous Milgram experiment, where ordinary people routinely inflicted fatal electric shocks, or so they thought, on some complete stranger, just because a white-coated authority figure told them to do so. And they probably haven't seen Craig Zobel's wonderful fact-based film Compliance, where perfectly ordinary people sexually abuse a young girl, who also meekly accepts their abuse, just because they all believe a voice on a telephone telling them to do so is that of a policeman. It is said that far more evil has been perpetrated throughout history by obedience than disobedience. And I think that's absolutely true. And the Milgram experiment and Zobel's great movie show how very easy it is for evil people to manipulate the trust of normal, kind and caring people. But we don't have to be turned into torturers or concentration camp guards in order for our natural kindness to be transformed into cruelty. We simply need to be kept in ignorance, to be trained to look the other way and not see the cruelty that our trusted leaders are causing and accept it as normal. And this conditioning us into ignorance is going on all the time, 7 days a week. As Edmund Burke once said, all that's needed for evil to triumph is that good men do nothing. And that's precisely what we have. Billions of good people quietly looking the other way and meekly doing nothing. The state of ignorance in which we're kept is not unintentional. It's a carefully maintained and long-established tool of empire. Even the Romans knew about it 2,000 years ago, for the expression bread and circuses goes back to those days when the Caesars clearly understood that all they had to do to keep the massed ranks of ordinary citizens subdued and oblivious to how they were being plundered and exploited by their own trusted leaders was simply to give them enough cheap food to eat and enough circuses to distract their attention. Bread and circuses. Food banks and TV sets. The same old evil tricks of empire are as alive and well today as they were 2,000 years ago. Those who would presume to lead us do everything in their power to deliberately keep us in ignorance about what they're really up to. If that seems overly harsh, just look at how they respond when whistleblowers like Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, and Edward Snowden, to name but a few, bring the evilness of trusted leaders to our attention. If we discovered what our trusted leaders were really up to, we might want to do something about it. Because we're naturally kind people and are naturally repelled by cruelty and the suffering of others. If we were not naturally kind people, we could be shown the incredible suffering our trusted leaders casually inflict upon others and view it with complete indifference, if not actual pleasure. But that is not what happens. We're repelled by it. So they deliberately hide it from us, or lie about it instead, to keep us in permanent ignorance. That people are deliberately kept in a state of permanent ignorance is simple to prove. But like so many obvious things, it sometimes needs to be pointed out. Like that children's story about the emperor's new suit. Because the best place to hide things is often in plain sight. I was very fortunate to be brought up in Rhodesia before it became Zimbabwe. Living there for the first 20-odd years of my life taught me many things, one of which was how to be a racist. Now, I didn't go to any classes on this subject, nor specialist training courses. I didn't need to. I simply absorbed it from the environment that was all around me. It was completely normal for a white person to be a racist in colonial Rhodesia, which was itself a normal creation of the great British Empire. It was only when I left Africa and was able to view that period of my life through the prism of distance and objectivity that I came to understand how I'd been tricked, how I'd been lied to. And it made me very, very angry. Some people think they could never be so easily taken in. They're wrong, and that too is an easy thing to prove. Consider this. Nearly everyone consumes animal products every day of their lives. Meat, fish, poultry, dairy products. Every single day, tens of millions of good and kind people in Britain alone are responsible for causing unbelievable cruelty to helpless animals. They do this for a number of reasons, mostly because they're never encouraged to really think about where their food comes from, but also because they believe they need to consume animal products to stay healthy. After all, it's what the experts tell them. And the relentless screening of countless TV cookery programs given over to the subject of eating animals helps to reinforce the conditioning. In other words, eating animals is a major part of the environment that surrounds us. It's entirely normal to do it. But the fact is, of course, that we don't have to eat animal products at all, as hundreds of thousands of healthy vegans can easily prove. So here we have a fine example of how our society is conditioned to inflict unnecessary cruelty on helpless animals on a massively, massively barbaric scale, and for absolutely no good reason at all. Partly for the fickle pleasures of our taste buds, but mostly for the huge profits of those who run the animal cruelty industry. People are tricked into thinking that animals must suffer because there is no alternative. Just as we in Rhodesia were tricked to thinking black people should suffer because there was no alternative. So the real problem we face, and the reason why the school of kindness is so essential, is the considerable number of upright pillars of society who initiate and preside over the dehumanizing process, those who condition most people to override their instinctive kindness and to become responsible for cruelty instead, and who condition some kind people to be transformed into savage and inhuman monsters. Training ordinary kind people to perform the obscene functions of tyranny. The people responsible for all this are the fine, upstanding pillars of society we're conditioned to adore and emulate, the mighty kings and queens and presidents and emperors and other great political leaders and their various enablers, such as the army, the police, the judges, civil service mandarins, and the multitude of sycophantic flunkies who serve them all. There are also the billionaire captains of industry we're all conditioned to envy. People like Andy Grove, for example, who used to run the IT giant Intel, and who once claimed that the purpose of capitalism, which is the new global religion, the purpose of capitalism, said Mr. Grove, is to shoot the wounded. Well, there are plenty of billionaire arms makers to help him do it, gleefully supported by mighty generals, suited banksters who happily pay for it, and famous media moguls and trusted news anchors to tell them it's all in our best interests. These creatures are the real problem. These are the real monsters. These are the people directly responsible for transforming naturally kind people into subhuman zombies. And let us not forget the priests. Those good and fine people who are always on hand to reassure us that all the evil perpetrated by our great trusted leaders and pillars of society is fully sanctioned by God himself. If all that seems too cynical to be true, remember the whistleblowers and how our great trusted leaders deal with them. Just look at how the real heroes of the people are treated for the sin of trying to alert us to the evil of those great trusted leaders. And do please believe me, evil is not too strong a word for what they do on a daily basis. For consider this, ever since the dawn of human history, we, the 99%, have been plagued by leaders. And look at the state of the planet these great leaders have created. We have global poverty, where millions quite literally don't know where their next meal will come from, at the same time as some of the creatures of the 1% have personal fortunes worth more than the entire income of countries, entire groups of countries even. We have massive ecological devastation, and we have permanent war, the most obscene, entirely man-made abomination possible. This is the planet our great trusted leaders have created for us, and they dare to tell us there is no alternative. Like almost everything else that emerges from their mouths, it is a monstrous, breathtaking lie. There are always alternatives. I will discuss leadership in far more detail in a future recording. For now, I'll just point out that we don't actually need leaders at all. What we need is good information and a reliable method of allowing normal, kind people, us, the 99%, to form consensual decisions about how our community should work. Such a thing is perfectly possible. Here it is. I call it the People's Constitution. I'll also be talking about that a lot more in the future. We do not need our great trusted leaders, and without any doubt at all, we should sack the ones we've got as soon as possible. Political power must be moved from the bloody hands of the 1% to us, the 99%. Once that happens, permanent war will finally end along with global poverty and social injustice, and we can get on with creating long-term sustainable economies that benefit all people and all living creatures in general. This is possible. This is an alternative. This constitution, which anyone can freely read on our website, could provide it. So this is the simple purpose of the School of Kindness, to help enlighten people to the truths that are being deliberately kept hidden from them, to correctly educate the young and to help re-educate the not-so-young, and to show one new possible reality, one exciting possible alternative, In future recordings, I'll cover a number of various important subjects, such as history and religion, economics, the media and politics. None of these subjects will be the same material provided by orthodox teaching establishments, for the simple reason that most of it is not taught by orthodox teaching establishments, which are key components of maintaining institutional ignorance. No prior knowledge is necessary to study at the School of Kindness. Anyone who is capable of reading can learn what I have learned. I hope you found this talk interesting and will look out for others I'll be doing throughout the centenary year and beyond, which is my little contribution to the memory of those poor souls who were so terribly betrayed by their own trusted leaders 100 years ago. And my warning that those same trusted leaders are still out there. There are different actors on the stage today, but the play is exactly the same. Over 200 years ago, the great Tom Paine said this: "Change of ministers amounts to nothing. One goes out, another comes in, and still the same measures, vices, and extravagance is pursued. It signifies not who is minister, the defect lies in the system. The foundation and superstructure of government is bad." I've got a few books here which I consider to be very informative, and it comprises something I call an introductory course to humanity. The core essentials of history. History is always a great place to start, and this book here, The Blood Never Dried by John Newsinger, is a fantastic book. This should be mandatory reading in every school in Britain. It's essential reading, basically. Another essential reading is this more better known book, People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. It's important to have a good understanding of people's history of the United States because, after all, the United States is the global power today. So having a bit of an idea of its real history is important. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. I cannot recommend any of them highly enough. Speaking of which, here's another brilliant little book. It's not much longer than a pamphlet. It's called War is a Racket, and it was written by Major General Smedley Butler, who at one time was the highest ranking, the most highly decorated senior officer in the American Army. This is a fantastic little book, mostly because of the fact that it was written by such a high-ranking officer, which is a pretty rare thing. I'll just read this little bit on the cover. It says, "I spent 33 years in the Marines, most of my time being a high-class muscleman for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer for capitalism." War is a racket. It's still a racket. It's still going on. Another brilliant book is over 200 years old, The Age of Reason by Tom Paine. Essential reading. Nothing more to say. Another great book, this is written by David Edwards and David Cromwell. It's called The Guardians of Power. And it gives a very good explanation of how the media works. Mostly here in Britain, but not just here in Britain. I mean, it's pretty much the same all over the world, all over the Western world anyway. Web of Deceit is by Mark Curtis. It's Mark Curtis is a wonderful historian. His work is great, and you can get a clue from the title. It tells you quite a lot about the institutionalized deceit of our own trusted leaders. Great book. Naomi Klein's Shock Doctrine is another superb read. All of these are very readable. They're not difficult. They're not difficult reads. I can't recommend them highly enough. And finally, I've got here George Monbiot's Captive State, the corporate takeover of Britain. This is quite an old book now. It's 20 odd years old, I guess. but